G'day, Professor Joseph Drew. I was asked this morning, why do we have these labour shortages? Why can't we get staff? Well, in this video, I will answer your questions. I won't be giving you the obvious answers of our so-called experts who have missed the point entirely. Hang on all the way through to the last slide and you'll discover the most important answers to this question and the things that have been neglected and must be fixed if we are to remedy the situation. So one of the reasons is a drop in productivity. Early on in COVID, when people had to work from home, those of us who were lucky enough to keep our jobs were incredibly grateful to have work. We were also worried by external events, and one way of not worrying so much about COVID was to throw ourselves all into our work instead. But that's all worn off. People aren't so grateful or worried about their job anymore. People don't seem to be worried about COVID at all anymore, and aren't looking for work as a distraction from more pressing worries. Indeed, the opposite is happening. People are more or less refusing to come back into the office. They're being distracted by things around the house. They're losing motivation for their work. They're losing loyalty for their employer. They're losing that drive to work hard and diligently that we experienced early on in COVID. Now, I know in my workplace, productivity has dropped at an alarming rate, and amongst my colleagues it has. I have no reason to think that's not the same in most industries. There's also a drop in productivity arising from sick leave. Every time someone thinks they've got a cold, they take a COVID test. If they've got COVID, they take sick leave. Or if they think they've got a cold, they get sent home from work, like my wife, who's a nurse, does all the time, and she's a casual, so she gets sent home without pay because she's been exposed to COVID in her workplace, and consequently the work is not being done. Now, to cover for that sick leave, you need additional staff, don't you? Which is going to take staff out of the prospective or potential employment pool. Now, the reality is also, look, there's never probably been a better time to throw a sickie. You take this COVID test at home, you report a result, no one can really verify, and you're untouchable for 7 to 15 days. Then you throw in long COVID and all the other things that people claim they have. And these things may be true, I'm not saying they're not. But the potential for doing the wrong thing has never been greater. So I imagine the likelihood is that we've got higher levels of people throwing sick days when they're not actually sick than we've ever experienced before. And that's obviously going to have a big impact on the workforce and the productivity of the workforce. The Great Resignation didn't happen to the same standard as in Australia as it did in America, but it has happened, particularly in my industry. All the old, experienced people were made redundant. They were your best workers. You need this experience. We draw on it all the time. We're not often conscious of doing so, but we do draw on it, and organisations do rely on it. That's now gone. People who are made redundant are no longer there. Their institutional knowledge is no longer there. You know what? A lot of other people in their 50-somethings went, work's so uncertain, my wealth's going to get swallowed up by huge inflation and unpredictable markets. Why am I doing this? I've just had a bit of a shock about a reminder of how mortal we are. Why am I doing this? Do I need to keep working? Is there something I'd rather do? And indeed, that's actually what I went through. I brought forward my retirement plans significantly by 5 years. I want to go and write the book that changes the world, something I've always wanted to do. Go back to some supply teaching, part-time teaching, because I'd love to have an influence in young people's lives. And most importantly, I've been putting a lot of resources and efforts into developing a farm so that I can grow fresh organic produce for my own health reasons, but for the satisfaction of working with my hands. So I'm an example of this great resignation. I couldn't go straight away, but I plan to go in a couple of years, and it was prompted by all this COVID thinking. You know what? I don't want to spend the rest of my life talking to you guys on videos and writing papers that no one ever reads, and watching in disbelief as we have one public policy train wreck after another. I want to do something more worthwhile with my life, and I'm sure I'm not the only person. So that's going to have an effect on the employment market, because a lot of people are just taking themselves out of the employment market. So it's going to be harder to find staff. And there's a mismatch of skill. We've always had a mismatch of skills, because in Australia we overwhelmingly prefer to import the skills we need for our workforce through migration, rather than training the right people with the right skills in Australia and through our education system, which, let's face it, is a bit of a failure, and our unemployment social security system, which has been particularly poor at reskilling people and getting them into the right areas where the work is. Now, to make all matters worse, you had a lot of people who were skilled in the services industry who are probably trying to get out of that services industry as quickly as possible, because they got told they were non-essential workers and non-essential people during COVID. And, you know, this COVID stuff's been done once before. The chances are it'll be done in the future. We've set a precedent. It's a dangerous industry to stay in, because, you know, at the sign of a cough, you can cease to have a job, cease to have a livelihood, cease to have money. So there would be a movement within the industries as well, and that's obviously going to exacerbate the problems that we have. But the last thing is probably the most important thing, and I've touched on it a little bit: the behavioural conditioning. Everyone forgets that economics is fundamentally a behavioural science. And we told for people for 2.5 years that some of them weren't essential, that they didn't have to work, that they should sit at home and not work, and that the moment you have anything that could conceivably be construed as a symptom, you should not go to work. And I'm not saying that any of those things are wrong or right, although if you read my book, Natural Law and Government After the COVID Revolution, you'll find out exactly what I think of our public policy disasters. However, we have conditioned people just like Pavlov's dogs. We have conditioned them to not rely on their work, to understand that there's things other than work, to understand that their work can simply disappear without a moment's notice, that their livelihood could disappear, that their career could disappear, that they can't plan about future careers. We have conditioned people to think about things other than work. Some people in Victoria had a whole year to sit at home thinking about other things other than work. And for some reason, we're surprised that people don't want to be in the workforce, that people aren't working as hard, that people don't want to be in certain sectors, that people are ringing up sick at the drop of a hat, that people are throwing sickies. It's hardly surprising. Economics is a behaviour science, and I think everyone during COVID forgot what human behaviour is all about. Please watch my videos on the natural law. So I hope this video has answered your question. There's a lot of reasons for our labour shortages. They're not going to suddenly disappear. We've done a lot of damage over 2.5 years. It's going to take many years to rectify that damage. Some of the damage, such as getting rid of our most experienced and productive workers, may never get fixed. So we're in for a hard time. Once again, I implore public policy makers, can you please think through your policies before you enact them? Think about the long-term, the teleological consequences. Indeed, watch my natural law videos and the other videos on this channel, and that might guide your thinking, particularly around public policy success. If you found this video helpful, please use it in any way you wish. As long as you're helping other people, it's more than fine with me. Flick it on to someone else, and thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.